All right, well, thank you so much. It is a pleasure to be with all of you. I'm Cecelia Wogan-Silva, and today we're going to talk about purpose-led marketing. I am thrilled to be talking about this subject. As you just heard Lizzie say, it is something that has been near and dear to me, almost as a side project at Google for the last few years. We had a few interested brands, Unilever, of course, Coca-Cola, some major global brands who wanted to have this conversation with us. And then 2020 hit. And when 2020 hit, many brands, I think, became even more conscious of the possibilities of the role that they're playing in society. And so this year in particular, we have found ourselves drawn into this conversation more than ever before. So I'm thrilled to actually share what we've learned so far about what's working. From our various conversations with these global brands, we've assembled what we believe are some of the best practices. There's a bit of data behind some of those, and some of these are simply just based on those who are leading the pack. So with that, I will share everything that we know. First things first, why even bother with purpose-led advertising at all? Purpose-led advertising really has become such a critical opportunity because consumers more than ever before are buying not things, but ideas. Right now, 64% or 2/3 of consumers globally are reporting that they are belief-driven buyers. They're choosing, they're switching, they're boycotting brands based on those brands' values, their stand on societal issues. 72%, almost 3/4 of the consumers are saying, yeah, I'd like to buy from a brand that actually matches my personal values. Now, when I think about that, I'm like, well, it kind of feels natural that there's been this evolution over the past many years. Think back almost a century ago. When advertising was first coming onto the scene, really, we were promoting, say, soaps by just talking about the soap. We focused on the product. Way back in the day, that's all you did. I have clean soap. It's super pure. It'll make you clean. And that's all we did, in hopes that we actually would convey to somebody that we have exactly what they might need or want. And as time went by throughout the century, we started to talk to consumers who actually might be more likely to be buying soap, right? So we started leaning into who the consumer was in the latter half of the 20th century. Who are they? What do they think? What do they need? So if you really want to sell soap just to women, maybe you talk about it a particular way. And as we've started to move through the early part of the 21st century, what we've had to contend with, of course, is that the consumer is now driving. This is an entirely interactive experience now with our consumers. And so we really need to tune into what is it that they believe and what do they want to be a part of. And that's really sort of the evolution of the way people are engaging with brands. And of course, this is probably contributing to why brand purpose has become so central to strategy today. Now, at Google, we actually did some research just this summer because we kind of knew that this was happening. We saw it starting to happen. And in particular, we were getting asked a lot of questions about who was dealing with the pandemic in terms of advertising and marketing really, really well. Who was succeeding on our platforms? And the category that struck us as having had the earliest jump start on creating success for themselves was in the world of direct-to-consumer brands. So, go to the website and order your razors on demand. Go to the website and order your food or your wine on demand. Whatever it is that you felt that you needed directly delivered to you without, say, a retail experience. These are the brands, obviously, we all started to rely on this year. And what Google discovered was, whoa, these brands were just killing it in the market. And we're talking about items that are fairly commoditized, right? So how was it that they were succeeding so well? And one of the things that we discovered was that they were 36 times more likely to be searched for in relation to a value statement or a position of some kind. Here's what that looks like on the left side of your screen. Brands that support LGBTQ rights or good causes or animals or the environment, right? People are starting to look actively for a brand's position around an issue that might be important to them. And look, where the consumer goes is where the money goes. Brand purpose has now become central to the business conversation. Does it affect the bottom line? I know many of you are responsible for performance results, and the answer is yeah. Purpose-driven companies are enjoying more profitability and better growth over time than brands who are not leveraging their brand purpose. In fact, right now, in terms of ESGs, they occupy about 20% of all of the assets being traded globally today. We're talking about an economy of about $250 billion. Stakeholder capitalism has become the new growth investment. How is that possible? How is it that all the money makers of the world, all of us good capitalists, could possibly be investing here? Well, it has everything to do with what I just talked about. Where the consumers are spending their money is where the money is to be made. And so even now in Silicon Valley, you're seeing startup money going heavily toward businesses that are being born with a purpose, and many other businesses who are successfully making a pivot toward leveraging their brand purpose. Overall, these businesses are enjoying about a 30% higher average CAGR than their competitors. That's pretty important differentiator. And over time, this is from Kantar Millward Brown, the perceived positive impact, the companies with a perceived positive impact tend to have much more aggressive value growth over time than their competitors. Would you like to grow at 175% over the years in front of us? Maybe 5 to 10, or would you like to grow at about 70%? It hinges on how the position is being created. In the eyes of your consumer, it matters a lot. Now, of course, brand purpose is also really important for making change on the planet. But I think one of the things that I like to really focus on here is not just whether or not a business can lean into its role for making a contribution for society or planet, but it's to remember as marketers, you are in a tremendous position of, you wield so much power. Marketing has reach. You are in the position to reach hundreds of thousands or millions of people with a message. And marketing has the story. Even if it's a story that's just a few words in a search ad, that story is actually starting to affect people's perceptions about good choices in front of us. Right? So marketing is in this incredibly influential role around driving change with brand purpose. You have all the reach and you have all the story to create support for an issue or even change culture over time. So it's why I think it's so important and central to the conversations we're having as advertisers for the long term. Now, let's be honest. There are not that many brands in the world that are really good at this. I'm going to just call a spade here. The challenge we've got is for all of the data that we can point to that says, well, consumers really like it, and people can make lots and lots of money if they lean into it aggressively. Right now, about half of the people who say they'd like to buy from a purpose-led brand can't name a single brand with a deep sense of purpose. I spend a lot of my time on the subject, and I probably would start to pause after about 5 or 6 brands. What that suggests is there is so much opportunity. This is a territory that is just in its earliest days. There are a few obvious contenders here, but we have room to grow. And creating that recall for consumers and having that correspond to overall sales growth is the opportunity we're facing in 2021. Now, I think a lot of people at this point in conversation will often ask me, okay, does that mean that we as a brand have to take a stand on everything? Because there seems to be an issue du jour. There seems to be something that we do need to lean into and care about every month, right? And the answer is no. While there are important moments in time, whether it's Black History Month or Mental Awareness Month, while those could actually become something that you do want to lean into for conversation, that's not really purpose. Purpose isn't CSR. corporate social responsibility. Purpose isn't even about causes. Purpose is what matters to the brand and why the brand matters to the world. Clarify for me why the brand matters to the world. And that becomes the point of differentiation for us. And I'll give you a bit of a range of examples. This is Allbirds. We know them as a brand that was born and bred from purpose because they're all about sustainable products. So here's a quick example of how they convey their story. Okay, very straightforward. We know what they stand for. But what if you're a brand that didn't just get put onto the scene in the last 10 years? Your secret deodorant, the product that was strong enough for a man but made for a woman, pH balanced, product focused for the duration of its entire history. That's all they ever talked about. How does a company like that make a pivot? They shift toward what their larger significance is in the role of their audience. Secret is no longer just about product, but they're really about being part of a support system for girls and women. And that story is something that they've been building over many years, whether they're tackling bullying or haters online. This is really about what is it that girls and women need to feel that they have the support of other girls and women. That's what they tried to convey last year during the Women's World Cup with this execution.
When you cheer for me,
you cheer for me.
and me.
And me. You cheer for me.
You cheer for me. Cheer for me. And me. Cheer for all of us.
And then finally, I want to share with you an example from a retailer. It's B&H. They're actually really well known for photography, and in their earliest days, they were known for photography and video equipment. But they have become a massive player on the global scene because of the online experience that made them available to people all over the world. And they're now competing with, other massive retailers who can deliver a ring light to your front door. They needed to be able to leverage some sort of purpose or values story in order to differentiate themselves. Or I should say, that's what they wanted to do in order to make sure that they were not perceived as just yet another electronics retailer with the right product. Having the right product at this point is table stakes. If you've got it and I trust you with my credit card number, what difference does it make to me? Well, it makes a difference for them. And they wanted that story to be told about who their heritage and where they came from. This is for them why they matter to the world. And I'll give you an example from the early part of some brand work that they did last year.
This is a brief history of B&H, everyone's favorite photo and video store. The year was 1973. The Mets went to the World Series. The first cell phone call was made. And Bleamy and Herman opened a specialty photography shop at 17 Warren Street, New York City. They had a simple philosophy.
Be honest, treat people right, and they will come back.
Thanks, Irving. Also, free candy. And it worked. Over the next 20 years, we expanded and moved to West 17th Street, then 34th Street and 9th Avenue, and added more products. Lighting, binoculars, telescopes, audio, video, tripods, computers, printers, mobile, televisions, projectors, drones, and even more free candy.
Okay, I always like to end on the free candy. I wish I had some to toss to the crowd. Really, here what you see is there's no shame in actually featuring the product whatsoever. You saw it in secret, but here they actually go out of their way to show it while they're telling you the story of their heritage of being in New York City, of being a family-run business. Two Hasid Jew brothers who actually decided to come together and start this business on the Lower East Side of New York. And that has turned into a global phenomenon because of their investment in doing business with integrity. That's a part of why they feel that they really matter to the world. So that gives you a bit of a range of how it is that brands are able to convey what does it mean to actually even have a purpose. Now, Of course, many of you in the performance industry might be looking at this and going, well, look, this is a brand story, but where does it really belong in performance? And I should say something right up front as we start breaking down the best practices. One of the most important things to remember is that once this brand essence is declared and established, there is no room for it to become peripheral, for it to just be its own separate little brand campaign that we're going to run once a year. This purpose becomes integral to every story that gets told. And when I've worked with brands who are saying, oh, we're very clear on exactly what it is that we do, but we just don't put it into our search campaigns, or we just don't put it onto our Twitter handle, you have to ask yourself, well, then why is it that only 50% of those people who care about purpose-led ads can name one? That's why. You have an opportunity to make sure that this purpose is being conveyed at every touch point. On your YouTube channel, on your Instagram handle, on your Twitter feed, in your search ads, on your website. I shouldn't have to link 6 or 7 times to find your corporate governance statement in order to truly understand what your purpose is. This is the way that we get consumers to fully absorb what it is that you represent and why the brand matters to the world. All right. So let's talk a little bit about what are the core strategies among our global partners that have proven to work for them. And I will work through these one at a time, but just as a quick overview, here they are in a nutshell. Number 1, think long-term. This is not a proposition that happens for this week or this month, but this is something that should endure for the years in front of you, something you feel is true and authentic for the brand for the years to come. 2, commit to courageous creative. We can talk all we want about how much we care about the world, and there is great work going on behind the scenes, but the reality is if it doesn't have the support of standout creative, nobody's going to remember that. 3rd, we're talking with brands now who are understanding that this is no longer a one-way street. This is about moving from a message that you'd like to convey to creating a movement, involvement, and representation from your consumers. 4th, this is a strategy I like to call fight like a pacifist, which is how you lean into the wind when things get tough and challenging and even controversial, how to actually keep going. And 5th, plan for authentic connections, because purchasing your way in, there is nothing wrong with it, trying to find the airtime to give your brand the oxygen that it needs. But the reality is consumers are paying very close attention to who is trying to woke wash their way into profits versus brands that are looking for conversation and a way for the story to get carried forward more authentically. So we'll talk through each of these very briefly now. First, let's talk about long-term commitment. I mentioned again that this is not something that we take on an issue du jour. And to just demonstrate this point, I'd like to bring up Unilever's Dove campaign. It is world famous. It is world class. Obviously, the Titanium Grand Prix winner. In 2013, they won for Sketches, which is a fantastic campaign. It was launched on YouTube in which they understood how women were describing themselves versus the way that others would describe them. It was a phenomenal campaign, and many of you, I hope, remember it. But here's the crazy stuff. This isn't something that they just invented that year. Unilever has been leaning into the conversation about a woman's sense of self-worth and beauty and esteem for over 17 years at this point. This started with Real Curves many years ago. In fact, having now looked under the cover a little bit, what we also learned was it started internally at Unilever. And then that campaign and that work that was introduced to the consumer started to take some twists and turns over the years ahead. Many of you might remember the Evolution campaign. I didn't remember the Show Us Your Skin campaign. There are some that made headlines and some that didn't, but they stayed committed to the course over time. So again, this is not something peripheral, and this is not something temporary. This is something that's integral to all the work for the brand. And in fact, when you try to just jump right into the middle and make it a temporary moment, it can actually really backfire. This summer, we saw a lot of brands trying to get involved to demonstrate their solidarity with Black Lives Matter movement, especially here in the United States. But unfortunately, by jumping into that without thinking through a longer term strategy, they got a bit of backlash. L'Oreal came out and said speaking out is worth it. And then Monroe Bergdorf, their only trans model, posted right immediately following that, yeah, you actually dropped me from a campaign in 2017, threw me to the wolves for speaking out about racism and white supremacy. So jumping right into the conversation, we all have to start somewhere, but we have to recognize either you're in this for the long haul or you're not. L'Oreal took this feedback and made a commitment to say they were, and they did make some changes, which is fantastic. But it's a good reminder that this is something that's not going to just be, on June 1st, 2020, and then on July 1st, we can move on to something else. It's an enduring position. Second, let's talk about committing to courageous creative. So look, you heard in the introduction, I've spent my last 12, 13 years at Google working with some of the best targeting technology and machine learning automation solutions in the world. And yet, every single day, I have made a case for how important creative really is in order to make a huge difference for the performance of our campaigns. In business terms, all of you can appreciate, whether or not you're creative directors, that when it comes down to it, all the targeting in the world is not the only part of the equation. 50% of your campaign effectiveness hinges on your creative. 50%. Now, this is Nielsen Catalina data from a couple of years ago. Google has done its own research against search, against display, against video. This is the lowest number I could come up with. It goes as high as 80%. Creative, whether or not you are an analyst or a CFO or a creative director or a brand manager, creative is fundamentally fueling some of the biggest successes for brands in the world. It's the story. It's the story that influences people, and it matters a lot. So just coming through with a position is one thing and committing to that, but coming through with really effective storytelling is the difference of being able to, leave money on the table or glean every drop of impact that you possibly could. Now, when it came to creative this summer, in the spring, I should say, we saw a lot of advertisers trying to take a step forward in conveying a sense of community around our COVID-19 pandemic. And that was the right thing to do. At the same time, what we also saw was a lot of work that looked exactly the same. I'll remind you. Okay, so I think all of you remember those commercials. No shame in any of that. We were all working with stock video and stock footage and stock music. And I even found a few, I'm not kidding, 3 commercials that used exactly the same soundtrack. Nothing wrong with that, because at this particular moment in time, which I do not believe, and I hope there will never be a moment like this again in our lifetimes, we were not acting just for the individual brands. We were acting on behalf of the we, on behalf of the larger, society as a whole. And so it's no wonder that all of the work that looked the same pretty much had 0 ad recall. Sorry to say it, but basically brands were conveying a good story for people to feel a coming together, which is the role of a brand right now. We do look to brands to lead us. But in fact, all that work just kind of blended into nothingness. Doesn't really have that recall. And because that moment in time, as I said, I believe is past, now the question becomes, well, how do you stand out from the crowd? You don't want to look like every commercial looks the same. And we saw the same thing this summer. Black Lives Matter movement took off in the United States. And while all these brands started coming forward, they all came forward in the exact same way. We stand against racism. We're with our Black community. Here's our official statement. And the hits just kept coming. Everything on my Twitter feed, my Instagram, everything I ever saw in advertising, it was all the same. It was all Black imagery with white lettering following Blackout Tuesday. Everything looked exactly the same. But in fact, actually, if you really want to stand out, you just can't play it exactly the same as all of your competitors. And one of the best in class examples of this comes from Patagonia, who really, I think, is, cutting edge in having established the movement that took the advertising industry by storm when they came out and said the exact opposite of what most advertisers will say. Don't buy this jacket. They did this in 2020, and people were outraged. How could Patagonia have purchased media and told a story that said you shouldn't come forward and buy something? Well, it was their way of getting the surprise out of their consumer and to have people sit up and take notice. And that year, the company revenues grew by about 30%, because what people understood was, I'm not just buying this jacket because it's fashionable. And I do buy into the belief that we shouldn't be over consumers. But if I were going to buy a jacket, I would buy it from a company that's taking great care with their product and their labor and their sourcing. Right? That courage and surprise is the thing that had people go, oh, wow, Patagonia, you are the brand that I align with. That's how I feel too. And if I were going to go out and buy a jacket, it's going to be from you. Courage and surprise is something we all shoot for in advertising all the time. It's especially important in purpose-led marketing. You'll typically feel like, hey, as long as we're saying the right things, isn't that enough? No, it's not. 100 years of great advertising can tell you it's not enough. Neuroscience doesn't work that way. People need something that's different to have them blink and look again. That's how your brain works. So courage and surprise has an especially important role in purpose-led advertising. I think another fantastic example that we saw here in the United States was a retailer named REI. And on Black Friday, you probably know everybody's so excited about standing in line and knocking each other over for the biggest discounts. But if you're a retailer whose entire business is about getting people to go outdoors, you sell tents and sleeping bags and backpacks and hiking shoes, maybe that's the last thing you want to be encouraging your consumers to do. Every retailer banks on Black Friday. So for this company to basically come forward, REI came forward and said, no, we're opting outside and we're closing on Black Friday. They surprised the entire industry by saying, we're not going to do it. And as a result, that surprise got so much attention, so much chatter, so much, of course, viral support, but also fan and advocacy support. Their sales within that season went up almost 350%, more than 350%. For store sales, they basically have established themselves by doing something that nobody else was doing, really marking their creative with something courageous. I know many of you know the Nike work and the Colin Kaepernick work that happened around Dream Crazy. And this happened in 2017, before I would say the momentum around civil rights in 2020. The campaign was perceived, of course, it was very controversial. Colin Kaepernick, this NFL star, is being featured in a Nike ad. I thought he went away. Yeah, well, it was the courage and the surprise that Nike decided to bring Colin Kaepernick back from the shadows and shine a light on him and the issue of racism in sport. Of course, that was a huge risk, but because of that risk, it really got people's attention. And that year, they actually are crediting the campaign with about a 30% increase in sales. The earned media alone was worth over 150 million. And that was then. 3 years later, they can't even put their finger on a number. I love the way their founder actually describes this. You can't try and go down the middle of the road. There is no lukewarm creative. You have to take a stand on something, which is ultimately why the Kaepernick ad worked. Courage and surprise, committed, courageous work. The other factor in great storytelling is that it really requires stories that are integral to the brand and the product offering. So Nike obviously is very much a fan of taking risks, right? They've always been about just doing it. Or here I have a great example from a company called Burlai, in which they already had a spokesperson, right? They already had Serena Williams representing this beautiful, intimate apparel. And then they realized that their brand, because they had this incredibly intimate relationship with women already, was in this terrific position to convey a cause-based message as well, a very intimate one, which I'm going to share with you on the right.
I love myself. I want you to love me. When I feel down, I want you above me. I search myself. I want you to find me. I forget myself. I want you to remind me. I don't want anybody else. When I think about you, I touch myself. Oh, I don't want anybody else. Oh no, oh no, oh no. Think I would die if you were to ignore me.
This campaign obviously represents an incredibly intimate issue, but it's integral to what Burlai was already doing because they're selling intimate apparel. And so it's perfectly aligned to what the brand actually is about in the first place. Now, the data that we have at Google that supports this is from a series of ads that were examined a year ago. We looked at hundreds and hundreds of purpose-led ads that were defined as purpose-driven that ran on YouTube. And what we discovered by looking at them and then looking at the performance of those ads was that the ads that featured a story that was integral to the brand, like breast cancer health and intimate apparel, as I just showed you, always overperforms the average benchmark. But the bad news is when you are trying to feature something that's so unrelated to your brand, say you are in the business of selling auto parts online and you're trying to promote gender equality, you're so far removed, people have to work too hard to make the connection. That's when the ad performance declines. Now, when I say ad performance, I'm not talking about clicks. I'm basically talking about either purchase intent or sales, because we worked with the clients to look at this kind of stuff. So you're basically really in a position to convey a story that's actually about your business, and then people will remember it and be responsive. Or you can reach for the stars and try to extend yourself into something totally new and different. But unfortunately, the advertising is not going to get you there alone. It's too complicated. So generally speaking, the highest performance ads are those that are about issues that already make perfect sense for the brand and don't require my brain to have to work too hard to connect all of the dots. Success is tied to thoughtful connection between the purpose and the business itself. All right, third important strategy is moving from message to movement. You heard me say it's really important that advertisers appreciate that this isn't just a brand advertisement or brand campaign, that it's integral to everything you do on search, on Instagram, on YouTube channels, on Twitter, everywhere you go, on your website. One of the only ways that that can happen, or one of the reasons that that is so important, is because what we're not trying to do is just tell a story, but we're trying to get it so ingrained about our brand for our consumers that they could potentially carry that story forward for us. Moving well past the message that we purchased and told in the first place to seeing it take off and go forward almost without the brand. So on this front, I will go back to the research that I mentioned that Google did this summer, in which we were examining those direct-to-consumer businesses. And one of the other most phenomenal insights that was gathered from this research was how important it was for consumers of direct-to-consumer brands, the ones that are killing it online in 2020, those consumers really want to be a part of something. They are looking not just to purchase from the brand, but they're looking to join in and represent and advocate for the brand, right? 8 out of 10 millennials and Gen Z will agree with the statement, I'm more loyal to brands that make me feel like I'm part of their community, right? So what that means is people are looking up Billy's YouTube channel, right? Or their Glossier's design is important to them, or Harry's packaging. So we discovered they're talking like maybe 600 times much more likely for these brands to be searched, their social media to be searched in partnership with the brands. Or brand aesthetics are highly likely to be investigated. I'm looking for their design, their logo. I want to use it. I love their packaging. Or even their merchandise. I used to make fun of the concept of merch. It is honestly now become something so vital for people to be able to say, I belong to this tribe. These advertisers are being sought after for their hoodies, their tote bags, their stickers, their wallpaper. 20 times more likely than any other type of brand, because they have effectively conveyed their brand equity story in a way that others say, I want to carry that on a t-shirt as I walk through my day. Customers want to be part of something. Now, if I want to participate in something as a brand, or as a consumer, I can participate with the product. And I love this product from Bank of the West. It's a bank that basically introduced the idea that there's 1% for the planet account. So basically, it uses a carbon tracking tool, and it allows people to essentially earn enough cash back, but instead it goes to donate account revenues to an environmental nonprofit, which is fantastic. I know that if I'm adding 1%, and I know hundreds of others are doing the same thing, that adds up. I feel like I'm a part of something. So just by using the product, I represent it. But let's think for a second about that. That little credit card is just sitting in my wallet, and nobody else really sees it except for the cashier. That's not the same as actually having a bigger impact in a community. For that, we actually need to know others are doing it at the same time as us. It's an important validation. I want to know how many other people are participating in this movement with me. Small Business Saturday, that was introduced by American Express many years ago, now it's about, I think, 12 years ago, introduced this concept that said, you won't be the only one. If you shop small on Saturday and support your local businesses, a lot of other people will be doing the same thing. And that movement started to take off because what happened was all these local businesses started to get the support from Amex to recruit customers to come in. And Amex was out there encouraging consumers to flood their local economy. And as a result, what you discovered was that Saturday, you were seeing your friends and neighbors in the local shops. And that movement starts to make you feel like you're not the only one. The hashtag picks up, I'm shopping small. I start to see it in social media as much as I see it live and in person. And in fact, one of the things that I love about this campaign is that now it's to the point where, yeah, in the beginning, they supported it with things like signage and tote bags. I still have mine, and a coffee cup, and that's great. That was the sponsored part of the event. But now, literally, cafes are using the language. Friends don't let friends shop at chain stores. Shop small. It's become something that I decided I want to use, and I don't need to credit American Express for it. But do we know where it all came from? Right? Small Business Saturday, it was the concept that led the culture to changing their attitudes toward local economy support. So I love this example because we've gone from it being entirely driven by a brand to being taken over and led forward by people, just everyday people and their businesses. Now, one of the things that works really effectively in creating movement and love for merch is simple visuals, simple hashtags, simple language that can easily be rebroadcast. That happened on the Black Lives Matter movement. We see it in t-shirts or the Solidarity Fist. We see it also even in like old campaigns like Red, a simple symbology of what it's supposed to stand for. Stuff that can cut across product of all kinds like t-shirts and credit cards and phones. Remember flip phones? I do. Right, but the bottom line is all of that merchandise is the beginning of being able to represent a story and carrying it forward. And the other factor here is that it's not just merchandise. It becomes something that comes to life through others starting to retell their stories. And the way that that's happening today through digital media is typically where people start picking up a hashtag or retelling their story on YouTube. And I will share in a few minutes a bit of background about the way that that's happened on major social movements. The idea of, it gets better doesn't just happen with a hashtag. It starts by individuals telling their story on YouTube and others feeling brave enough to tell theirs. So creating a movement that allows customers to actually carry the story forward is part of getting the brand cultural influence amplified exponentially. That's really where you now have clear understanding. You're no longer in that I can't name a brand and what they actually stand for when it comes to purpose-led advertising. All right, but before we get there, I do want to just pause and say, look, I know sometimes people get nervous about tackling an issue because not everybody will necessarily agree with the way a brand might be taking a stand, whether it's on a societal issue or even just to try to establish sort of their heritage and where they came from. And when I get the question about, like, what should we do when we face controversy, or how do we plan ahead to avoid it, which is usually much more common, my answer is don't. The best advertisers in the world are not avoiding controversy. You are not going to actually create that courageous moment and surprise your consumers and have them looking up your logo to wear on a t-shirt by avoiding drama and controversy. In fact, you want to lean into it. It's actually to your advantage. But it's a matter of how you lean into it, knowing the fight that you might be heading into, and knowing how you're going to handle it when you get there. So I call this strategy "Fight Like a Pacifist," and I call it that after the great John Lewis, who died this summer. He was sort of the conscience of Congress in the United States, and he said, "Never ever be afraid to make some noise and get in good trouble, necessary trouble." And he's famous for this quote because he actually has been a longtime vocal advocate for the Voting Rights Act and has been fighting for civil rights his entire life. And as a young man, was on one of them in one of the most famous bloody battles around civil rights called Bloody Sunday, in which he marched over the Edmund Pettus Bridge head on into a squad of police who were carrying batons, prepared to actually keep marchers out from coming to the other side of this bridge. He knew the controversy that he was heading into. He knew the threat, and he kept marching. And his strategy was based on the same ideals of pacifism that, we've seen great people from all over history take on, which is sometimes you just got to keep going. As long as you can take a stand and hold on to it and don't back away and don't react with, I'm right. No, you're wrong. No, I'm right. Just keep going peacefully. And with pacifism, you're able to actually shine a light on your cause and your issue even better than before. So with all of that talk, I'll give you a couple of examples of what I mean. Sometimes you need to lean into the controversy. IKEA is known as maybe an incredibly practical and intelligent brand offering terrific home furnishings, but they're also known as being a contributor to disposable furniture and a lot of stuff that you may or may not really need or want. And they've been actively trying to, reposition themselves as a brand that believes in long-term sustainability for the planet. They're changing their product, they're changing their sourcing, they're changing the way they do business in the stores, outside of the stores. So rather than run from this accusation that they are actually contributing to the stuff problem on the planet, they actually lean into it. First with a story called The Stuff Monster. I'm not going to show you the ad right now, but basically they begin with that. And then they even go so far as to say IKEA is going to modify their business model. I'm sure many of you saw this first because I know it happened in Europe first. IKEA buying back furniture that you no longer want to recycle or to resell it. So you don't turn and run. You keep marching, and you do it consciously. This is a great example from IKEA doing exactly that. Or MasterCard has had this long-standing relationship with the World Food Program, but at the World Cup a couple of years ago, they thought they had a clever promotion, which was, for every goal scored by Messi, 10,000 children would receive a meal, but they got terrible backlash. So because, recognizing that this is a company that had just reported like a 38% increase in their overall revenues, they had plenty of money to go around. Why were they limiting their donation? And rather than turning and running from the controversy that this created for them, they actually listened to the conversation. You tune into it, and they changed their strategy. They literally said, based on the feedback, we're adjusting the campaign to replace the 10,000 meals, and we're making a contribution of 2 million meals in 2018. I pointed out not just to pat MasterCard on the back for the donation. That's great. What's critical here is how important it was that they kept going. They didn't disappear off the scene. Their World Food Program continues now. It's become more integral to their overall strategy. You lean into the feedback. Now, there are ways to preempt this. They could have run actually a test campaign first. They could have done that in isolation in, say, one state or one country or one zip code or city to find out how people were responding. At Google, we can actually conduct sentimining on YouTube, meaning mining for sentiment, how people are commenting and responding. Are they interested and excited and forwarding this to their friends? Because that's basically what happens with video. You forward it to a friend because you want to spread the joy and the idea that it represents a little bit of your identity. Or are they writing in and saying, this is disgusting. This is not something I want to align myself with. That commentary is something that you can leverage from the data that is available to you this afternoon by running the right kind of test campaigns. So as soon as you're willing to actually just keep fighting like a pacifist, keep going, you're not going to abandon the cause. It's just a matter of in what way will you continue to move forward. And this finally is one of my favorite examples of this concept. This was Mondelez had introduced a wholesome campaign around wholesome graham crackers being a part of wholesome family lives. And they featured 2 dads as part of family life. And they got a huge amount of backlash because there were some conservatives who felt that 2 gay fathers were really not perceived as wholesome at all. They got so much hate mail and hate commentary, but they kind of knew that it was coming. And they leaned into the controversy and they took advantage of all of this commentary. They also took advantage of all of the commentary that came in that was very positive and affirmative to say, thank you for appreciating. And the idea that, really what makes a family is love, because so many of their consumers saw this as an incredibly positive thing. They took all of that positive affirmation and printed out every message that they received by email and on their YouTube channel. And they rolled these little printed messages up into tiny little scrolls and created a sculpture. And that's what's on the upper left-hand side of your screen that said love. And they introduced that next as a part of their campaign. Talk about leaning into the wind. Nothing could have more aptly been able to, demonstrate that their commitment was to the idea that families are comprised of love, and that's what they wanted to be associated with more than anything else. So it's a great example of being able to lean in, know that the controversy is coming, and have a plan. All right, and finally, I'd like to just quickly talk about how it is that brands are really connecting authentically. Now, authentically is one of those words. I know it's a lightning rod. Some people, are still looking for a definition around what it means. But I will say authentically, without trying to define it right now, has become such a critical component for purpose-led marketing because the world is in charge because of these mobile phones that we all have in our back pockets. I can literally videotape people being dragged off of an airplane and change the shape of a brand within hours. Authenticity is constantly under the microscope for brands. We know, and we have an opportunity to comment on whether or not we believe in what you're doing. As consumers, we have that opportunity. The transparency that you provide about what's really going on behind the scenes The realness in which you try to convey your story is going to have enormous consequence versus trying to make everything look perfect and pretty from the outside. Being able to acknowledge that you're imperfect, but you're on your way toward a cause or a position is very, very important. So one of the most important things that we think helps brands create that vibe of authenticity is by conveying real people's stories. Now, this does actually connect back to what I talked about earlier in creating a movement. You know, when It Gets Better started on the platform on YouTube, it began as a way of a few people, two men, just trying to say to other young teens who were facing serious depression as they felt marginalized in their communities for coming out. These men were just simply trying to say, hey, you're not alone. There are other people out here. Trust us, it does get better. That movement got started on a platform like YouTube, and it invited others to tell their story. And that's what gave it so much authentic credibility. I'll give you an example, just a flavor of how the campaign took off.
It gets better.
You are not alone.
And so I can now say that I'm queer and proud.
Those things that people tease me about, they are absolutely true. And they're what make me fabulous and amazing.
This campaign gets followed by millions of people, teens coming out, but also others telling their story about what it felt like for them to come out and that trajectory of their lives in order to create an entire social movement of support for people who had otherwise been really struggling. Now, what does that have to do with brands connecting authentically? It has to do with involving real people in conveying the story. And that's typically where you'll start to see movements take off. Oh, sorry, looks like my computer doesn't want to keep moving. Huh, that's fun for me. Let's see if this will keep going. Let me try one other thing. There we go. And in fact, what we've also seen is that the real participation that's happening by way of these explosive stories taking off is also being ignited by our creators that are sitting on the platform. So Mr. Beast, many of you probably already know him. He's got close to 30 million fans at this point. And he's known for all kinds of really great fun contests of encouraging people. And then he gives money away. Like, I'll pay you and I'll buy anything that you can carry out of the store. Well, one of the biggest contests that he promoted was actually the involvement of his fans to actually generate funds for planting trees with the Arbor Day Foundation. And he made $20 million in less than 3 months. And I have many, many stories of this kind of action happening on the platform. And it's because you've got instantaneous reach and an instantaneous opportunity to get a story across with video. And those stories are not just landing in people's minds and building a nice brand image in the background. They're literally getting people to click and purchase and donate instantaneously in under 15 seconds. So there's this real response-oriented culture that's attached to these movements. And that's why you'll typically see brands are launching some of their biggest purpose-led campaigns in an environment like this, where they can tell their story and they can get the expansion and movement and commentary and feedback of authenticity about what people really think and how they might want to evolve this campaign and whether others are going to be joining in with them on this campaign. I'm about to show you the final campaign that I wanted to share today, and it's Like a Girl. I'm sure many of you know it, but it's one of my all-time favorites because we worked with the agency as they were in development on it. And many people know of this campaign because of the years that followed, in which literally today people will hashtag and talk about what they're doing like a girl. There is an entire movement on YouTube about what people are doing, quote unquote, like a girl. It's a massive part of great creator storytelling. And it all didn't start at just the Super Bowl, as many people think. It actually started on YouTube and others starting to tell their story. And I'm super excited about it, in particular because here in the United States, we have our first woman coming into the White House. And so I thought it was apropos for celebrating the end of 2020 to share this one with you.
My name is Dakota, and I'm 10 years old.
Show me what it looks like to run like a girl. Throw like a girl. Fight like a girl. What does it mean to you when I say run like a girl?
It means run fast as you can.
So anyway, that campaign always gets me, even now, many years later. I think it is a movement that started because of its power in video and its invitation for others to participate in the conversation about what it actually means for them and how they've actually started to take ownership of this concept of like a girl is a tribute to how powerful the story really is. And the incredible importance of inviting your consumers in to participate with you authentically. So with that, I will say,
My name is Dakota, and
I will say these are some of the best strategies that we've seen from our global partners. They think long-term. They stay the course. This is something for the duration that they're going to stay committed to. These brands are committing to really courageous creative. It's not always epic films, but it is really the stories that get people to sit up and take notice and turn things on their head. That's true of all advertising. It's very important in purpose-led marketing. Third, they're moving from just telling a great story to creating movements, inviting people in to take over the story and expand. And that's usually done through social media and by inviting in real people's stories. And of course, I love good imagery that telegraphs or great merch. It goes a long way. Fourth, they're not running from controversy. They're testing for it. They're leaning into commentary. They're reading those comments and they're actually writing back and getting very involved. But they're not turning and running back to the other side of the bridge from where they started. They're staying the course and they continue their fight because that's what it means to have made a long-term plan. And then fifth, they're creating authentic connections, including real people in their stories and inviting people to actually carry their story forward. And that is typically one of the motivations for why people will share a video and remind others to take a look at something, because it affirms their identity and it feels as if it's got real truth and authenticity to it. So those are the best 5 practices that I could share with you today. I thank you so much for sticking with me through all of them. And we can now pivot to any discussion or questions that you might have about what I shared today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Cecelia. It was really